In this video, we will show you how to replace your front brakes, pads and rotors on this Chevy Malibu. This will be located behind your front wheels. Let's get into it. Okay friends, let's get started on our job. The first thing we need to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Once you've done that, continue on to removing all 5 of your 22mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Inspect your lug nuts as you remove them, replace them as necessary. Now that we have the wheel off, let's pay attention to our caliper. We'll be looking for our bleeder screw. Commonly you will find that you have a bleeder screw cover. Just go ahead and pop that right out of the way. The next thing we'll have to do is use a 10mm. We're going to open up the bleeder screw, make sure we can see a steady trickle of fluid coming out of here. It's a good idea to make sure you have a collection receptacle for this. Now, when you do have this open, we're going to have to push back the caliper piston, which is located behind this area. To push that back with that bleeder screw open, we're going to use a pry bar and carefully start prying in between this area, gently pulling the caliper outward. You can see fluid. I got my collection receptacle. Let's press it in. Looking deep inside this area here, I can see the piston. It looks as though it's pressed all the way in. We're going to give that a more thorough inspection once we have the caliper out of the way. For now, we'll go ahead and close up that bleeder screw. Let's continue on with our two 14mm headed caliper slider bolts. For this, we'll loosen the top bolt, start it back in just a couple threads, and then fully remove the lower bolt. Quick inspection there. Inspect your mounting hardware as you remove it, replace it as necessary. Set these aside. Let's take hold of this caliper here. Carefully slide it out of position. The next thing we need to do is have a look down in this area. This is the caliper piston. If you see any fluid coming from around this area, that means the caliper is more than likely leaking internally and you have to replace it. This one looks fine. The caliper piston's already pushed all the way in. If your piston isn't pressed all the way in, continue using a caliper compression tool now and press it in until it's completely bottomed out. Once you've done so, set this aside, putting no pressure on your flex hose. Let's remove our 2 brake pads. When you remove your brake pads, it's a good idea to at least give them a close inspection. If it looks like they're worn at an angle, you could have an issue with the caliper slider pins. It's something to take note of. As you can see, one of my caliper bracket tins came off at the same time. That's okay. We are replacing these anyways. You can take hold of them and set them aside. Use a 21mm to remove your 2 caliper bracket bolts. Once again, fully remove the top one, a quick inspection, and start it back in just a couple threads. Now we can remove the caliper bracket. We'll give it a quick inspection and set it aside. Let's remove our brake rotor. You'll find that you have a T27 torque screw holding it in place. Carefully remove that and remove the brake rotor from the area. We'll give this an inspection. You will be reusing it. Remove your brake rotor. There it is, friend. Once you have the caliper out of the way, we're going to continue on with cleaning the mounting point where the brand new rotor will sit. You can use a wire brush for this. There we go. That looks a lot better. The next thing you want to do is make sure you clean along the back side of the wheel bearing. We don't want anything getting jammed inside that area. And then lastly, along where the caliper bracket will sit. Apply some anti-seize. Now it's time to install our brand new brake rotor. If you have coated rotors, you do not need to clean the braking surface. Otherwise, make sure you clean both sides of the brake rotor with some parts cleaner. Let's take this brake rotor and put it in place, aligning all 5 of our stud holes and our mounting bolt hole. Once you have that in place, continue on with your 1 mounting bolt, start it in, snug it up. For that bolt, you just want to make sure it's snug. Now it's time to pay attention to our caliper bracket. We already removed the tins from each side of the bracket. Those came off at the same time as the pads, so we don't have to worry about that. If yours did not come off, carefully pry them out of place. A quick inspection and you can set those aside for recycling. Once you've done that, continue on with your 2 caliper slider pins. To remove your caliper slider pins, you can take hold of it, give it a little wiggle, and slide it straight out and away. While you're pulling on it, pay attention to your protective boot. This is made out of rubber. You don't want to damage it. Hold onto that boot and slide the pin right on out of there. The next thing you'll want to do is clean and inspect each one of the caliper slider pins. To do that, use a clean rag and give it a quick wipe. The areas that we need to pay attention to on the caliper slider pin are the entire smooth shafted area, but then also up by where my thumb is here. You're going to find that there's a small groove. It's important to make sure that that groove is clean and free of any debris. That's where the boot will sit, and you don't want anything making its way inside this area, potentially binding it up in any way. That's going to cause a braking issue. Go ahead and clean up both of these slider pins. Quick inspection of that one. That looks good. Set it aside. Once you have both of the pins out of there, continue on to your caliper slider boots. To remove these, you could use a small pocket screwdriver. Carefully pry the boot away from the bracket. Pull it out of place and go ahead and clean it up and give it a close inspection. When you clean it, you can twist a rag, slide it right on through the center, go ahead and clean it up and then give it a close inspection. Wow. Quick inspection here. Make sure it's not torn, worn, damaged in any way, and do the same exact thing to your other slider pin boot. Set these aside. Let's continue on to cleaning the bracket. Use your wire brush and clean down the 2 areas where your tins were located. Give each of the areas a quick inspection. Make sure you don't see any raised areas. Maybe it's rotted in some way. If you have any raised areas, it can cause an issue with your brake pads where they can't move as they should. That's going to cause a braking issue. Go ahead and clean them down. Let's get both sides of this bracket. With both of those clean, let's continue on to our 2 caliper slider ports. When you clean this, if you were to use parts cleaner and spray in, there's the probability it's going to force out some of that spray. So be extremely careful. Once you have some cleaner in there, continue on with a bore brush. Let's give it a little rinse, a quick inspection, and do the same to the other port. One last quick inspection of the bracket itself, and now we can continue on at the bench and we'll lubricate this. With the bracket cleaned, we can lubricate it. Let's start with some high temperature caliper lubricant. We're going to go inside of each one of the 2 caliper slider ports, lubricating especially along at the very edge here. Once you have that port lubricated, continue on with your caliper slider boots. Once again, if they were torn or damaged in any way, just go ahead and replace them. Take that boot and slide it into place. Once you feel as though you have it in place, just go ahead and give it a quick twist. Make sure it's completely seated all the way around. Continue on with your caliper slider pin. We're going to lubricate the entire shafted area and all the way up closest to my fingers where that small groove is. By adding lubricant here, that will help keep moisture and debris out of this area. Take that slider pin and carefully slide it into position. We're going to twist it as we continue so we can spread that lubricant around. While you press it in, confirm that the boot's seated completely in the groove all the way around the slider pin and it's completely seated in the bracket. One last twist here and do the same exact thing on the other side of the bracket. Got our other slider pin. Let's get this lubricated. There we go, all the way up in that groove. Don't forget about it. Let's get this in here. Twisting as we go. Just test their functionality. Continuing with our high temperature caliper lubricant, make sure you lubricate each side of the caliper where those brand new tins will ride. We'll take those tins and slide them right into position, press them in so they're in the fully locked position. That one looks good. Do the same on the other side of the bracket. Let's get this over to the vehicle. Let's get the caliper bracket on here, slide it into place. Start in each of your two 21mm mounting bolts, snug them up. Torque those to 111 foot-pounds. Now it's time for our brand new brake pads. When you look at your kit, you'll find that you have two inboard pads. The inboard pads will have a wear indicator. You'll find that one of the inboard pads has a wear indicator on one side of the pad, and the other one will have it on the opposite side. Do a quick comparison to your original pads, and what you'll find is the inboard pad for the driver's side will have that wear indicator facing up along the top there. Let's get this in position, sliding it over the tins. Slide it right on in there. There we are. Now, once you have that in place, make sure that it can move around and you didn't have to hammer it in any way. If you did, more than likely the bracket isn't cleaned well enough. This one's fine. Do the same thing to the outboard pad. For the outboard pad, there really isn't much to pay attention to. You just want to make sure it does not have a wear indicator. We'll take this and slide it into position. You might just have to press up on that tin a little bit. Slide it right in. There we are. Once again, we're confirming that we can move both of those pads before you continue. Before we slide the caliper into position, let's apply some high temperature caliper lubricant to the inboard side of the piston here, directly where it touches up against the pad. Once you've lubricated that, continue on to the back side of each of these two ears. This will help with vibration dampening and noise reduction overall. Take that caliper and slide it over your brake pads, putting it in position, aligning your slider pins. Get some blue thread locker on these. Start these in and bottom them out. Torque those to 20 foot-pounds. Let's give this area one last quick look to make sure everything's tight as it needs to be. Once you've done so, continue on with your wheel. Start on all 5 of your 22mm lug nuts, bottom them out. Once you get the wheel back on the ground, we're going to torque each of these to 110 foot-pounds. Let's torque these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay friends, we've got one side of the vehicle done. The process for one side of the vehicle is the exact same thing as the other. Once you've done that, make sure you pump up the brake pedal till it's nice and firm, and then take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.